Hi, this is Johnny G with Out as the New In, You Have a Purpose podcast. And today I get the pleasure of speaking with Heather Amado and having her share her story of addiction and where she is today. How are you today?
I'm good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming and wanting to share your story. It's powerful, and we are here because we are here to let people know how important mental health is and where you were and where you are today and your battle of what you went through of resilience.
Yeah, thank you. There was a day that I thought I wouldn't be here. I honestly, I felt in my soul that I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have seen 30, and here I am 30. So yeah, I mean,
I'm very glad you're here.
Okay. Thank you.
I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet you.
I know.
Right?
And that's what I get to do now today
Right.
is like,
Right.
not only do I get to help people, but I get to network with other like professionals in the same industry and doing the same thing, whether it's substance use, mental health, eating disorders, what else? Like the acute psych hospitals, like
Right.
anything in that realm. And I get to know them and just know all the resources. Do you know how many family members or friends that I've helped on a personal basis just because of the networking that I've
Right,
made?
and where you are, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Because everybody that we know, that we run into and just have a conversation with, every single person is going through something, some type of trauma. And that's why my mindset is always just be kind to people, right? Because you don't know what they're going through. Mm-hmm. Right? And look what you get to do.
Yeah.
And how authentic you are in those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to share your story.
Yeah. So it's a dark one, but it comes to light.
I like that.
And I always start off with the childhood thing because I think it has a great impact on my story. Not necessarily like that's why I'm an addict or that's why I turned out the way that I did, but it was a norm for me because everybody's normal is different. If you look up in the dictionary, normal is like a person, place, or thing that appears normal. So it's not even a true definition. So normal is different for everyone. And my normal growing up was I had divorced parents. And my dad was well off, like he managed his money well, and I saw him every other weekend. But my mom, that I lived with the majority of the time, was in her addiction. So she used meth, primarily meth, other drugs, and she met my stepdad, same thing. So I grew up in a house, we were on Section 8 housing. Mm-hmm. My mom and my stepdad were always locked up in the room. And I pretty much became a mother figure for my brother really early on. As a matter of fact, he's visiting me now. He's down from Illinois. Got him up for school, made sure he brushed his teeth, walked him to the bus stop, and there's only a 3-year age gap between us. And
so you had to be an adult very quick.
I think so.
Very young.
Yeah, I did. And I'm grateful for it now.
Right.
I think it came with a lot of characteristics. But at the time, I was a little resentful because I didn't have the life that my other friends had. I was wearing secondhand clothes. I didn't make friends well. I've always been the chubby girl, so I got bullied as well. And I didn't have that support when I went home. And even when I went to see my dad, he managed better, so he looked better on the outside, but he was an alcoholic. He drank all the time. So I never felt like emotionally supported by anybody. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody growing up. And so all of these negative thoughts that I had about myself, you're fat, you're not good enough, nobody loves you, like those are the thoughts that I carried with me into my early teens and even into my adult life, which is why I brought it up. And then, I get to that age where, drinking and smoking weed is like a norm as a teenager. Sure. And so I was so quick to it. It was like, I didn't even question it because I grew up around that kind of stuff that it was like, okay, let's do this. Let's try this. So I started smoking weed in high school. The first time I drank alcohol, actually, I was 11 or 12. And I got so drunk that the next morning I woke up and there were knickknacks on the wall in my room that had fallen and busted. I had a bruise on my shoulder. There was like a puke pile near my bed. And I couldn't remember. And I mean, I dealt with it for 24 hours. I mean, I was nauseous and vomiting for 24 hours after that. That was the first time I ever put any kind of substance in my body, and I took it that far.
Hardcore.
Because I was like, I feel good. I don't hear all the negative, the negative talk that I
Right.
did.
It just drowned all that out.
I did.
Yeah.
Yep. And it felt good.
Yeah.
So the weed came pretty easily after that. And what happened, so when my mom eventually lost custody of me and my dad got full custody. Her addiction took her, deep down. She couldn't, afford the little bit of bills that she had anymore. My child support was paying for all of it. She just couldn't do it. And so my dad took full custody of me. And when I lived with my dad, he was like real strict with me. Like you couldn't go and stay the night at front. I felt like it was strict. Looking back, it really wasn't that strict. It's just
Right.
the kid mentality. So when I turned 18, I was like off and running. I'm like, oh, you can't tell me what to do anymore. I can do whatever I want. And I mean, I meant that. It wasn't but 2 months after graduation. And mind you, I graduated with like honors. I had a great academic career. I had a partial scholarship to ASU. I had a full scholarship to the community college where I live. Like I could have gone places. I do really well. I love math. I'm a math nerd. I could have done really well, but 2 months after graduation, I'm like, I just want to feel better. So obviously, like I am attracting what I'm wanting because I find myself around not the greatest people, not the greatest places. And cocaine makes its way into my life. And I was with my high school sweetheart, and I always tell this story just because of how quickly I was willing to give stuff up. I had a high school sweetheart. My family loved him. We were together 4.5 years. He had a job. Like we were doing really well. We got a house together. When cocaine and other drugs made it into my life, he was like, you have to choose. Like it's either going to be drugs or it's going to be me. And I was like, bye. So quick. That I was like,
had a hook in you already.
Yeah, bye. And I mean, I craved it. And it's because it took away every negative thought that I ever felt about myself. Not being loved by my parents, not feeling appreciated, not being the prettiest girl in school. I know I said it, but it's like, it took all of that away. And it made me feel a part of. And so in hanging around not the greatest people, I met a guy. It's how every great story starts out. I met a guy, and we were both in a really bad spot. I ended up pregnant within 2 months of meeting him, and my addiction had really taken off. I had dabbled into pain pills, and I remember thinking, like, this baby's going to fix my life. Because I was already feeling the effects, right? Like, I know I'm not headed in a good direction, so this baby's going to fix my life. And I'm going to stop using drugs because I want to be a good mom. And I want to do what he needs me to do. And I couldn't. I became what I called at the time, I was smart about it. And I went to emergency rooms to be prescribed opiate pain pills for phantom pains that I had, in my back, to make sure when I gave birth that I had legitimate scripts for it. But I used pain pills, opiates, the entire time that I was pregnant with my son. And mind you, I had never experienced withdrawals, ever. I had a steady supply at that time. So when I gave birth to my son, he was actually, I just thought it was normal. He's my first kid, but from what I understand, he was fussy. And I was like, oh, okay, well, why is he so fussy? And the nurse looked at me and she goes, well, how would you feel if you were withdrawing from opiates? And it was like a dagger to my heart.
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah. And, immediately I get defensive and I'm like, how dare you? And I asked to have my nurses switched. And, and then an hour after that, the doctor walks in. He's like, you got a prescription for this, there's no issues here. You're going to leave with your son. I'm like, yeah, because I know what I'm doing and she's wrong. But then, 2 months into my son's birth, he's here. I go through withdrawal for the first time. And I had never experienced something. I don't know if you're familiar with opiate withdrawal, but you get stomach cramps, you get diarrhea, you get chills, you get cold sweats, you get these muscle pains. I would literally beat at my legs. I would beat at my arms because these muscle spasms. And you want to sleep so bad, but that's the only thing you can't do.
Right. You just feel the pain.
Feel it. You feel it. And I remember, and you feel your emotions are amplified by 1,000. So if I felt shitty already, I felt 1,000 times more shitty. So everything with my son in the hospital kind of came flooding back. And I remember crying for hours. I couldn't stop. And then I set the tone with music in the background to just fuel that depression. I remember it vividly. And I remember thinking, okay, this is it. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm done. And
Especially when you feel what you just went through.
I did. And honestly, if you would have hooked me up to like a polygraph, it would have told you that I was telling the truth. I meant it. I meant it with all my heart that I wanted to stop. And I couldn't stop. And I didn't stop for years. Trying to stay on a timeline here so I'm not all over the place. I usually all over the place. So it progresses, obviously, as addiction does. And heroin found its way to me. There was a guy at my house one day and he was like, oh, you should try this. I'm like, oh no, I don't do that stuff. And all he had to say was, it's just like pain pills, but
Right.
stronger. And I was...
And cheaper.
Yes, a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And the first time I tried heroin, I shot it up. Yep, I went straight to the needle because all he had to say was that it was stronger.
Right.
And when they tell you that you're chasing that one high for the rest of your life, they mean it, because I never experienced anything like that after that day. It was like I was flying.
Wow.
Like I was flying. And so obviously I started chasing that. And mind you, I have an under a one-year-old kid with me. So at the time he was probably 6 months old. And me and his dad are both hooked on heroin. He has 4 other kids as well. I think 2 or 3 of them at the time were living with us on and off. They go back and forth between their mom and dad. So we're caring for kids. Mm-hmm. He and I. There's no other adults in the house. His mom had passed away earlier that year in our kitchen of drug-related, not overdose, but drug-related issues. Because it's a family disease, in my opinion. It ran in his family. It ran in mine. We were made for each other. And so we're caring for kids, which really we're not. And it took me a long time to admit that. I wasn't a bad mom, but I was in no position to be caring for children in that state of mind. Right. But I told myself I was a good mom. Right. Kind of pep talk myself. We lose our house. We can't keep up with rent. We start doing like petty crimes. It's actually called, the proper term for it is called organized retail theft. Mm-hmm. And so we would go and steal stuff and pawn it, or steal it and sell it, or take it back and get a gift card and so, like, it was a full-time job. Like, that's what we did. I was tired. It was tiring. But at the end of the day, we got what we needed. That's
a tough full-time job.
It is. It is. And the stress of, being pulled over or being caught, which happened. Right. I've got multiple shoplifting charges or organized retail theft. Mm-hmm. But a saving grace, which I didn't think of at the time, I got my first felony offense. And I remember thinking that my life was over. Like, I'm never going to be able to do anything. I'm never going to get a job. But I was shoplifting some Blu-ray discs. Blu-ray, they don't even exist anymore. And I got caught, and the guy had put his hands on me, and he grabbed my messenger bag that the movies were in. And obviously it got physical. My son's dad punched him, and then we got away. And so when they came back with the charge, it was aggravated robbery. That was the charge. Right. And I remember thinking my life is over. I'm never going to get around this, never get a job. Couldn't even hold one to begin with at the time. Sure. But that was kind of the beginning of the end. And it caught up with him as well. We were put on probation. This was like in 2014. And mind you, like, I had done a geographical, which is where you like move across the country because the city you're living in is the problem. But I took myself with me and then made my way back to Arizona. So I figured out that it wasn't the city, it was me.
Right.
Found the same stuff wherever I went. His legal stuff kind of piled up with him a little faster because he had a record previously from meeting me. And so what happened is he ended up going to prison, which sucked at the time because he was kind of like, as toxic as we were for each other, we were a team. And that's how we got stuff done. And so half of the team was missing. It was a lot harder for me to do the things I need to do, especially with my son. One would watch the kid and one would do what you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I had to get a little more creative. And actually, it got to the point where I couldn't even do that anymore. And so I would sell myself. I would trade sex for drugs or sex for money. That's where my addiction took me. And my family started getting involved because I was alone with my son, and I would show up randomly because I didn't have a team member or my partner. I couldn't come up with the money all the time for motels. And so I'd randomly show up at their doorsteps asking for somewhere to sleep. And so they would see the state that my son was in, the state that I was in. And they were trying to talk me into detox. And I think I had hit a low at one point. And so I reached out to my sister-in-law and I said, I can't do this anymore. I need you to take my son so I can go to detox and I can get help. She was there. She's not even married to my brother anymore, and me and her are still this close. She was there within 15 minutes to pick up my son.
That's a huge support system. That's awesome that you had that person that you felt extremely safe with, knowing that she would, at least the hope, right? The hope that she would take your son and take care of him.
And took me to detox.
Right.
And she's like, when you get out, we're going to figure this out. She's like, I'm going to start looking around for treatment centers. She's like, you're willing, like, let's do this. I complete detox, and I didn't go. They couldn't find a bed, like an immediate transfer. My sister-in-law was working on getting me. It's like a teen challenge, Home of Hope in Casa Grande for women with children. But there was a wait list, which meant I needed to go home.
Right.
After detox. Working in the treatment industry now, I know the importance of door-to-door transport, and I'm going to say why.
Right. I mean, and how long was your detox?
I think I was there for 6 days. Okay. And then I went home, and I'm like, oh, I feel so good, but the Suboxone's still in my system, that's why I'm feeling good. As that Suboxone wears off, I'm still not 100%. I've done years of drug use, right?
You have all these cravings still.
Yep. They didn't disappear overnight. And so I go home, I have a working cell phone, I have a racing mind, and I have the inability to sleep. And so I'm immediately, it's like a drug itself. Like, you can't not do it. When I try to explain addiction to somebody, I have everything going for me, and it's to my left, right? I have my son, my family, the support, the treatment. They want to be there. They want to help me. And I still turn this way. So I'm already on the phone. And I'm like, I need something, right? And, they didn't notice it at the time. But what ended up happening is I went to the Home of Hope to admit, and I tested positive for opiates and not Suboxone, because they know the difference. Right. And so they had to send me to CBI for a 24-hour hold just to get cleared so that I could admit into their residential program. I couldn't even stay at CBI for 24 hours. I was getting antsy. I had somebody pick me up, and I left. The next time I called my sister-in-law was like 2 or 3 weeks later, and I said, I'm coming to pick up my son. She goes, the hell you are. Right. She said, she goes, Heather, we didn't know where you were. We didn't know if you were dead or alive. Right. And, your son needed somewhere to go. I've been missing work to take care of your son. We had to call DCS. She goes, you're not able to take care of him. You're not able to take care of yourself. You're not allowed around my house, and you're definitely not allowed around your son. You need to go and get help. And I mean, my heart shattered into a million pieces because he's all that I had. Right. And it hurt. I mean, I cried. But then in that instance, too, it was like, okay, so I cried, and I was like, all right, this sucks, but I can do what I need to do now. And I don't have to carry around a 2-year-old. And so it became easier for me to do that kind of stuff.
Interesting mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, but funny, too. When you don't have a kid, people don't want you sleeping on their couch anymore because they're doing it for the kid, which I didn't realize. They cared about my son, and they wanted to make sure he was taken care of. So I live in Casa Grande, and the Walmart out there, because there was a brick wall behind their building, I would sleep behind their trash cans. Couch surf behind trash cans wherever I could. The people that you see walking on the street with the backpack and they look dirty, and you just know that that was me.
Yeah.
I drive on certain roads in Phoenix, and I'm like,
legit homeless.
yes,
Yeah.
nowhere to go. People wouldn't let me in, and I continued on that path. Petty crime, sex for drugs or sex for money, whatever it took. And then
You were surviving.
I was surviving,
Yeah.
barely.
Yeah.
And then I had a working phone at one point, and I had a room for a night, or I was staying with a friend. And my sister-in-law had sent me a message, and she said, "You haven't even tried to call your son. You haven't done this. You haven't gotten in touch with your caseworker. Your probation officer's looking for you. You have a warrant out for your arrest." She's like, "What the fuck are you doing, Heather?" She's like, "Look, I just need to know." She goes, "Do I need to adopt your son? Are we going to be adopting your son? If you're going to be a piece of shit, that's fine. Just let me know." And I was like, done. I was like, if you're going to do something with me, and I've never been religious, but I mean, in that moment, I was like, if there is a reason I'm here, show me, because I don't want to be here anymore. And I remember crying on that bed, tears, and I just wanted to die, but I didn't want to go out with the slits on my wrist. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go peacefully. I'm just going to take a little bit too much and not wake up. And I was waiting for it to be delivered to the room that I was at.
Thank you for joining us for part 1. We will see you soon for part 2 of the Out is the New In, You Have a Purpose podcast.